This is Rush Hour by Faye Chang. It's rush hour, and Ophelia has just brought her a bag of sour worms from the convenience store as a consolation gift. They're sitting by the curbside, one sour worm in each mouth. Talia's is green and orange, while Ophelia's is yellow and red. "Look," Ophelia says, drudging a strawberries and cream chup-chup from the depths of her bag and fiddling with its wrapper. "It's not that you're not cool or anything. You're really cool, and I like you a lot." Talia snatches the lolly out of her hand, scratches the plastic wrapper open efficiently, and passes it back, face blank. Ophelia clears her throat. "Well, in the friend way. I like you a lot as a friend, just not in... you know." She shoves the chupa-chup wrapper back into her bag and stares at the lolly for a few seconds anxiously before shoving it in her mouth. "It's not you, really. It's just that I don't even know if I like..." Ophelia clears her throat again and shrugs. "I'm probably straight. That's all I'm saying." Talia nods. She's staring at the curb where their feet are. Ophelia's got on sneakers with an LV on the back, clearly drawn on in red Sharpie. To the left of her back heel is an amalgamation of Mandarin brand stickers, peeled off peels and stuck resolutely to the asphalt. Their edges are frayed and their colours have been watered down. It's a wonder that they hadn't been washed away. It's been a while since it last rained, so only the part of the street closest to the drain is slightly damp. Talia picks a scab of grass off the front of her own shoes. "It's okay," she replies. It was only the third rejection in her life, and it was noticeably less disastrous than the others. Madison had cut her off entirely after a lengthy speech on Christian virtue and homosexuality, and Lily had given a long self-victimizing monologue, which ended up with her breaking down and confessing about her boyfriend of 3 years that she still hadn't told her parents about. Ophelia nudged Talia on the shoulder and held out another chupa-chup. "Spare one. Found it in a side pocket. You want it?" She extended it out like an olive branch. At least Ophelia still wanted to be friends. "No thanks." It was orange flavored. Ophelia shrugged and squinted out towards the west where the sun was setting. She stood up, shouldering her bag. "Anyways, I should probably be heading home. Mum wants to get some groceries on the way." She adjusts the strap of her bag and holds out the orange lolly again. "You sure you don't want it?" Talia stands up as well. "No, I'm alright, thanks." She makes a small smile, just so Ophelia would know she wasn't pissed off, and found her way down the street to where she parked her car. This hour was what Talia liked to think of as the dimensional sunset, when the sun glared through the shade of trees at a migraine-inducing brilliance. The shadows warped and shifted, stretched past skin, edges dissolving lazily into the surface around them. Talia tossed her car key loosely around her finger in 3 circles. She'd always thought the cusp of 18 would be more grand than this. It wasn't something she was particularly sour about, but there was a certain kind of freedom that childhood promised that she wasn't sure she would be guaranteed again. Across the street, there's the old park she used to play at, rather where the old park was. It's since been renovated with stylish new slides and a meek climbing web that was barely 3 meters tall. Her playground had one metal slide that scorched your ass off during the summer, a volatile seesaw that more than one kid had flown off of, and a circular sand pit that teetered on an off shade somewhere between yellow and brown. That's where she first met Madison. Without any intent of sounding politically superior, Talia had simply grown out of Madison. They'd been inseparable from 3 until 9, when an influx of students from the neighbouring suburbs brought with it a new wave of political ideologies and new modes of playground torture. Their little courtyard had become a microcosm of racial division that the teachers either never noticed or were too inept to deal with. Or maybe they had noticed, but hadn't really cared. Talia had always been aware of her Chineseness. She'd messed up some small pronunciations like kernel or sachet, and be faced with an instant wave of aggression. Madison used to be nice about it. One time she'd arrived at Talia's door an hour before dinner, presenting a handwritten list of common mispronunciations and how to say them correctly. "I searched them up," she announced proudly as she thrust out the list towards Talia. "You know more words than me though, so they've been 8 or so, maybe." Madison had stayed for dinner, taking big helpings of the pork belly pot and the tenderest stalks of bok choy, cutting them up fiercely with a knife and fork on a plastic kiddie's plate. Afterwards, they'd sat on Talia's bedroom floor, and Madison told her extensively about her new church, while viciously peeling a mandarin. "The communion crackers are way better than at the old one," she said in between mouthfuls. "You want a piece?" Talia took it gingerly. The preacher's a lot more boring though. He doesn't wave his hands around as much and he kind of squints a lot. At like, everyone. She held up the empty rind hesitantly. Talia took it from her and shoved it under her bed. At the page, and at us too. Mum says he's probably going to die soon. Talia had thrown out the mandarin peel under her bed a week after, when it started rotting at the edges. After that year though, Madison had started making more faces whenever Talia pulled out her lunch. She'd laughed harder whenever Talia phrased something oddly, or read something slower in class. There was this one time at the park too, when they'd gone for a picnic with their new friends. There was a small wooded grove behind the main play area. One of the other girls that Maddie sat around a lot, Jenny, picked the white toadstool mushrooms out of the ground and arranged their group in a sitting circle. "Let's play Truth or Dare," she commanded. Now, Talia crossed the street into the new park, past a screaming pair of siblings that had collided with each other at the bottom of the slide, and found the old grove. Thickets of leaves created a densely webbed dome above her head, and the toadstool mushrooms grew thicker than ever in clustered circles. Talia sat down where she'd sat back then. Madison and the rest of them appeared as childish apparitions around her. Jenny sat on a log so she could glare down at the rest of them, and pointed her hand imperiously at Madison. "You first." "Truth. What's the most embarrassing thing you've ever done?" Madison had glanced slowly around the circle, eyes sweeping over everyone's feet. As Talia sat there, she saw how distinctly Madison's eyes flashed to meet hers, then ducked away quickly. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress, pinching and unraveling the thread. Madison cleared her throat a few times, like the preacher she complained about so often. Then she turned her face like a sunflower to the sun, and recited the story of the letter to Jenny, like an oath. Talia had stumbled blindly into the woods. She couldn't listen to Madison recount how weird her mum's cooking was or how pathetic her pronunciation was. She'd used the list afterwards, reciting each word enough times to kill it. She was too busy summoning an expression of furious rage into her face. But she couldn't do it. All that really came was an emptiness, a small rift that wound its way down her torso. She wanted to lie down, let the rift cut open her body, and let the moss on the forest floor crawl into the open gashes. She wanted the leaves to remake her, gouge out her eyes and drown them in the river until they turned bright blue, drain her hair until it was brown. She saw a vision of herself, reborn, as a second Madison returning to their circle, sitting down in her neat green dress, laughing with her hand covering her mouth, and fiddling anxiously with a rosary at her neck. They wouldn't welcome her, but they didn't laugh at her either. Herself, the new one, as Madison, could simply exist. Madison hadn't shown up at her door that evening. She didn't find her in a quiet corner during recess and offer an apology. She smiled as usual when they sat next to each other in class, and she laughed the same at Talia's jokes. She held the same conversations. Talia couldn't do that. She hated her and wanted to be her and fell in love with her, all in the same miserable moment. Talia crossed the street again, walking over the new park. The screaming siblings had left, with a confetti spray of bark and dirt lying strewn in their wake. It probably wouldn't be too long before they uprooted the trees in the grove to extend the playground area, and the traces of her presence there would be buried under layers of concrete. As she walked past the bakery, everything seems to remind her of Madison. It's weird, because Talia hasn't really thought about her this much in years. She doesn't miss Madison, that's for sure. She'd been better off without her. She'd found new friends who had the same experiences, or were at least more understanding. But she would still see her from time to time, across the classroom, in the courtyard, on the bus home. She always looked lonely, Talia thought. There's a part of her that wants to lean down next to Madison and cradle her hands in her palms and ask, "Who are you now? Is there anyone who understands you?" But that's also just the bitter part of her that maybe just wants to prove her wrong for rejecting her. Or maybe the part that wants to save someone, even though she knows it would never have worked out. Instead, she turns into the Asian grocery stall on the way home, just as it's closing up. The auntie that owns it pinches her cheek affectionately and gawks at how much she's grown. The air here is warm with the smell of trampled leaves and fresh herbs. She's 8 and 18 and 80 in here, all at the same time. Talia fills up a bag with mandarins. They're an orange golden, and she would share them with someone if she had anyone to do that with. Right now, they're just for her. She pays the cost and nests them in the passenger seat when she gets back to her car. Talia inspects one turns on the engine, drives up to the curb gutter, then so carefully that they don't rip. Talia peels off the sticker and pastes them onto the watered-down amalgamation to join the horde. With the car indicator light clicking on in the background, she stares down at the patch on the ground, blooming like orange algae on the asphalt under the street lamp. Maybe the rain will get to it someday, or maybe the excavators will first. All Talia hopes is that by that time, she'll be long gone from here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maya, and this is my short story, Leap Year's Boy. February put the fish into the microwave. It was all curled up and sad, and the way that it turned inside made him think of a broken ballerina in a music box. As it spun, February felt a familiar discomfort. This was what he felt when watching game shows with his father, or listening to someone get teased at school, as if he was waiting for the fish to start crying. When the machine beeped, he took the plate out and set it down on the countertop. A trail of chimney smoke floated upwards. February poked it and realized that it was all soft and malleable. He thought about its fragility, its freshness. With a knife, he cut into the flesh of the fish and then unzipped it all the way down. He removed the entrails and put the shell of the fish in a bucket by the back door. The next step was the apples. He washed them in the kitchen sink and looked out the window and onto the fog. The sky was an early morning gradient of blue and yellow. February was excited for the violet that would come with twilight. There was a light tickle in his gut. It had probably come from the cheap meat last night. He wondered where the meat had come from. Old MacDonald had a farm, E-I-E-I-O, but decided not to pursue the thought any further. He used the same knife to cut the apples. It left bloody stains on the apple's crunchy flesh. The half-moon slices went into the bucket by the back door and, sort of, smiled at him. He took the bucket and left the house. The bucket made squelching and sloshing sounds and tapped at his leg. This was February's morning. Glockenspiel, wind chimes outside, remind the forest creatures to go to bed. Birdsong, receding blanket of fog, part for you as you walk. Glass ornaments, dew on leaves, decorating the way just for you. February Barnes walked down Albon Street and then left onto Vasey Avenue and then right onto Marsh Street and then right again onto the street with the name he couldn't remember. He stopped at the forest gate. He stopped to look into the woods, maybe to see a flash of white or to hear the whisper of a name, and then he started walking again because he swore he saw something standing in between the curtains of orange leaves. February kept up a steady pace all the way to her house. Hers was a familiar box among the others. He crept across the synthetic lawn and to the side of the house. Lucky for him, her room was on the bottom floor. She wanted the attic room, though. Witches always have the attic room. He tapped on the window softly and left the bucket hidden in the bushes under the windowsill. She always left the bucket there for him to collect and then fill up. Back on the sidewalk, he felt a childlike relief. February liked doing things for Lennon. He liked being friends with the witch. Most people didn't like her much, something about a disturbing aura, but since he could remember, he'd always admired her. Sometimes he'd ask the flowers what they thought. Petals love me not, lying dead in the old grass, forget the daisy. They met at the gate when the sun was beginning to splinter through the trees. February felt a slow building pressure on the side of his head and a distortion of vision in his right eye, disturbing aura. "Are you all right?" she asked. He said that he was. She hesitated. "You look paler than normal. Are you sure?" He said again that he was. The fuzzy, colourful blur in his right eye danced. He followed her through the trees. Trees that scratch the sky instead of caressing it. Trees that draw blood from the sky, the white, cloudy sky. Charred, burnt, black, bare trees. She held the bucket in her hands and swung it around like an unstuffed animal. The luridness, the cursedness, the cruelty of the act didn't seem to bother him anymore. It had become a standard activity on their schedules. Needles prickled behind his eye and the band around his head began to tighten. The fuzzy, colourful blur in his right eye danced. They hurried along with a stiffness that could have easily turned into a sprint at the snap of a branch. The forest filled their silence with ambience. February assumed that she'd added to the bucket. Lennon was mysterious in that way. She could make plastic things seem precious. She could lay a new secret into childish adventures. She could pull him out from under his sheets and convince him to just come along. The fuzzy, colourful blur in his right eye danced. They finally made it to the lake. A film of orange leaves and dead insects concealed murky depths. The lake was a cedar, beer bottle brown, but this didn't stop the kids from swimming in it on hot days. A rickety, mossy pier protruded out from the muddy bank and over the water. There was a wooden dinghy tied to a post by a rope. It bobbed up and down and floated lamely. Lennon left the bucket on the pier. Together they set the boat out onto the lake and manoeuvred it into the middle. That way they can't get you. That way they can't sneak up behind you. The fuzzy, colourful blur in his right eye danced. She covered them with some blankets, ones she knitted herself. With an old portable radio, she played music. Piano Sonata No. 14. By now the sun had completely dipped under the trees, and they both felt the cold seeping through their clothes. The fuzzy, colourful blur in his right eye danced. Lennon scratched at her nail polish, and February dangled his fingers into the water. He closed his eyes, and something told him haikus until he fell asleep. Cosmic No. 4, human sleep makes way for us. Roam the roads with glow. Scratch around the walls, still mistaken for the wind, we will fill the void. Wind laced with smoke blows through the crimson sky tonight. World keeps on spinning. She shook him awake. The aura was gone. All that was left was a dull throb that heightened when he moved his head. A misty dark blue light and her torch were the only things illuminating her face. "They'll be here soon," she whispered. He asked her what the time was. "I don't know, late enough." The moonlight glinted on the water underneath the pier, and a strange alien light kept a few rows of trees in sight. It was quiet until ding, ding, ding. The tinkling of bells straightened the two of them up. He felt a presence. It happens every week, but you still get scared. He felt as if something fragile was hovering behind him or touching him. He imagined butterflies crawling over his back and stroking him lovingly. He turned around. Sitting on the pier, lapping at the bucket, was one of them. Looking at one of them was always like looking at words. You had to read, you had to wonder and to question and to try to understand. He envied their mystery. They were like animals with child masks. They were ghostly and pale and glowing, shimmering rainbow at the edges. You should see them dance. It made eye contact with Lennon, and he watched the two of them hold it for a while. He could see the mutual respect. "Sing for us, Lenny. Please sing. We like it when you sing." "All right," yawning. "We'll dance too, yes. Okay." "This song is from Shakespeare. It's one my brother liked. Do you know my brother? He isn't alive anymore." "We know him, yes. He dances with us. He's here now, watching." "Oh, good." "Philomel with melody. Sing in our sweet lullaby. Lulla, lulla, lullaby. Lulla, lulla, lullaby. Never harm nor spell nor charm come our lovely lady nigh. So good night with lullaby." For a while, there was a wonderful pause. It continued dancing and hummed the melody of her words. It stretched its arms out to the dinghy and held them both in comforting hugs. Actually, the blankets seemed ridiculous in comparison. Come along to our silent tea party. Come along, Lenny, yes, the others miss you." And so they went along. They always did. February awoke to a shrill bird cry. They were tangled in her blankets on the lake's muddy bank. The radio was on and spouted a quiet flood of white noise. A rotten smell swam up and wormed its way into his nose. It was coming from underneath him. He realized that he felt something behind his head. A pillow? He grabbed it and held it over his lap. A fish. They trudged back through the forest. She collected the bucket, lit clean, and stuffed the blankets inside. The walk home was far more relaxed. The silence remained, but with no tension to pull it tight. Tinny radio music swelled around them. The gate creaked shut behind him. "So, I'll see you tomorrow, right? At school?" she asked. He nodded. Yes, they would see each other tomorrow. "Same time next week?" she asked. He nodded. Why should that even be a question? "Can you tie my shoelaces? My hands are full." He nodded and bent down. Her white laces had dragged behind her the whole way and collected burrs and leaves and a red, wet stain. February didn't see Lennon at school. Disappointedly, he rode home at the end of the day with fragments of conversations thickening and weaving together in his head. He decided he would call her later and organize something for the evening, perhaps a walk in the park. The sky, a faded pale blue, had been streaked with wondrously orange clouds. It had been months ago, but still. He remembered that she had had some explaining to do that day. Certain things will draw them out, things like the enchanting smell of petrichor, rain itself, the stillness of a clear night, the lure of a single street light alone in the dark, certain food smells. He had asked her how she knew. "I don't know, my aunt's notebooks have a lot of information in them. Well, I've heard them out and about before myself, I guess." He asked her what that was supposed to mean. "Oh, I don't know. Well, on my 15th birthday, they were clambering over my roof and scratching at the window. Do you even believe me?" He said that he really wasn't sure, and then he had asked her to prove it. They sat together, touching, on a bench under the warmth of the mid-autumn sky. They spoke a little bit about school, and then about the weather, and then about people at school, and then about their parents. The entire time Lennon kept fiddling with her earrings, taking them out and then pushing them back in. When they got onto talking about their parents, she hooked her foot around her ankle and swung her legs back and forth and back and forth and, "I'm scared," she whispered. He suddenly did not feel like looking at her. He fixated on an old man making slow progress across the park towards the playground. Finally, when he could not avoid her any longer, he pulled his gaze back. "What's wrong?" he asked, equal parts soft, concerned, and uncomfortable. She sighed and almost seemed to deflate. "You know how they're supposed to be timid, shy?" Yes, he knew. "There's this one, and I don't even think that I've ever met it or anything," and she pulled in a shaky breath. "It's been following me for days. It's even here now." He slid his hand into her pocket, searched for her hand, and looked over to the swing set. As he held her hand, he saw it rocking slowly on a swing. It was tall. Definitely not a late-night friend of theirs. It wore a long, white dress that hung flatly on its grotesque body. Unwashed, greasy hair curtained a pointy face, although most of its head was obscured by a plastic hat mask. He could, however, see its mouth. Lips were raw, teeth were pointy and uneven. This one glowed, but in a different way to the other ones he had encountered. Children played obliviously with toys at its feet. Lennon winced when it turned its head towards them both interestedly. She decided that they should go over to her house and do some homework. "February Barnes, isn't it?" "Yes, sir," hates hearing his name said out loud. "Enjoying school, "Yes, sir, very much, sir." Hates this. "Well, that's just wonderful, and you're in what? Your 11th year?" 10th year, sir. Yes, sir." "Please, just let him go." "Wonderful. Doesn't time just fly?" When February finally got to Lennon's room, he found her perched on her bed, reading a novel. Her pens and sticky notes were spread out beside her. Before he sat next to her, he went and leafed through her records, chose one, and put it on, carefully placing the needle on the spinning vinyl. "I'm sorry about my parents," she said, looking up from the novel. He laughed and said it was okay, nobody asked him any questions anyway. Lennon raised her eyebrows. "Really? I don't think they want to hear it. They're just asking because it would be rude if they didn't." He shrugged. It would be a nice gesture anyway. This time it wasn't the forest that filled their silence. It was the music. They fell asleep on top of the bed sheets. At some point during the night, he opened his eyes. There were footsteps outside the room. Right by the door, when they were the loudest, they stopped. They paused to listen. Again, he drifted off into a shallow sleep. Click. February awoke to the sound of the latch on the window opening. He realized that it was raining. There was thunder too. A slender silhouette standing by the record player was outlined by the moonlight. He watched in silent awe as it reached over and put the record back on. Music crackled into his ears. Its chest heaved up and down. Its hair drooped with water. The cat mask was streaked with cloud tears. February's eyes flitted to Lennon, still in deep sleep, and then to a painting on Lennon's wall, and then finally to the creature. The floorboards creaked as it made its way over to the bed. Sounds of breath were barely heard through the music. It stood for a long time, over the two of them, one awake, the other not. Slowly, carefully, it bent down and put a hand on February's cheek. And for some reason, he wasn't scared. He knew that he'd be all right. The creature was smiling beneath the mask. That means you're safe. February, too, was smiling beneath his mask. Warily, he put his hand behind the creature's head and began to untie the string of the mask. The creature smiled again because it was okay. It said, "You'll be free soon, free to disappear." The cat mask fell on the ground at the creature's feet. Sneakers, they wore old sneakers. And the face he saw was the only one he had hoped for. Brother? Me? On a young and fresh Saturday morning, February walked through the forest. Another full week of school had cycled by. He hadn't spoken to Lennon since Tuesday, when he had left her house after sleeping over. For most of the week, he had been in a dreamlike state and suffered obstructive migraines. Perhaps he was enchanted? Broken? He had a pretty good idea as to why Lennon wasn't looking for him. Why are you wearing that? February, lying on the floor of the bedroom, had been wearing the cat mask. As a matter of fact, he was wearing the mask as he walked through the trees. It offered him a sort of comfort. It was like the warming hug of a shower. It wrapped around him. It had the safety of a security blanket. It hid him. He was a child with an animal mask. He was glowing with a hunger for freedom. He walked for hours and hours until he reached the edge of the forest. There he stood out on a hill and looked down over a new town, a town that sat by the ocean. There was nothing on his back, but he knew that he wasn't coming home. She stood in her kitchen, waiting for the fish to finish microwaving. Outside, the trees were naked and aggressively pointy. Afternoon light shone through the last few orange leaves. Lennon thought they looked like throat lozenges. She knew that once those stragglers fell, it really would be winter. Things hadn't changed so much since February had disappeared. She wished that it hadn't ended the way it did with him. It nagged at her uncomfortably. It reminded her of her final interactions with her brother. A couple of weeks after he'd left, a little black cat had turned up on her windowsill. It started following her everywhere, comforting her. Ooh, meow, witch's cat, meow, meow. Sometimes it would disappear at night, only to reappear on her chest each morning with a fish in its maw. The cat reminded her of a friend so much, she decided to call him February. February, the boy whose presence had been as short as the month after which he was named. Thank you so much for listening to my reading of my short story, Leap Year's Boy.
This is 298 Days and One Lagoon by Hannah Pemberton. That's me. 1. There has never been a formal assessment of the salinity of Koenig Lagoon, but Jamie has her estimates. Estimates from the cool wash of water on her legs, the minor sting on half-healed scrapes, the brackish scent filling her head. When she tastes the water, it's fresh, hypertonic on her tongue, but the sting and open wounds burns her nerves with its salinity. It's an ongoing process, this distillation of reality from observation. Jamie's legs simmer in the heat, a strand of purple hair falling across her nose and obstructing her vision. She huffs and it jumps up from her face, and the Vanadil Blue Lagoon is an unspoiled sight before her, until the strand suddenly falls back into place. She stands atop the craggy plinth, barefoot, and feels its heat conduct into her soles. Without further thinking, she jumps and dives, perfect form. The arrow of her arms pierces the water, segregates it into two curtains flanking each side of her, before her body meets the briny cool and the curtains close. She's weightless, floating on the pathetic concentration of salt. Her eyes are closed, her legs curled up to her stomach, savouring this moment after the shock has hit her system. She only concedes when her lungs begin to struggle. She parts the skin on her neck, and water flushes into her open gills. Now with the brackish in her system, Jamie can better tell its salinity. 12 parts per litre. Breathing easy, Jamie pulls herself out of indulgent. Her head breaks through the lagoon sky, and she sticks her neck out above. Her dripping cheeks are already burning from the dry air. Her lips are chapped. She scans the rocky shore and spots a statue-like figure watching from above, a parallel set of eyes, shooting upright but tense and still. "I told you," Jamie shouts. She grins to show off the 2 rows of sharp teeth now happily occupying her mouth. Birdie, the statue, tumbles over. 2. The first time Birdie fainted was a special kind of disaster. She'd been in a primary school assembly, 34-degree heat in an auditorium without aircon. They had to stand up to sing the national anthem. A week later, Birdie was diagnosed with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or as she tells her friends, she gets dizzy and her heart beats fast when she stands. In the rush of things, she doesn't tell Jamie. As she's one of the new kids coming in for Year 12, Birdie expects Jamie to be nosy, and she is, but about all the wrong things. Not about who's single, or how harshly her teachers mark, or uniform policy. She's nosy about soil salinity and rainfall and endemic species. So Birdie introduced her to Miss Ross, the geography teacher, on the first day. In the first form period, new student Jamie had hesitantly sat before Birdie. Introductions were made. Birdie's voice had quivered in a way she hoped Jamie, with her intense stare, didn't pick up on. These crazy bright hazel eyes, the iris travelling from deep red brown to malachite green in a few millimetres. But what Jamie asked was, "What's the best place to swim around here?" Jamie had stuck by Birdie's side for the rest of the day, lingered in her friend group, which, fine, it was her first day. It's not like she knew anyone else. When it was time to go home, that window of acceptability disappeared. "Koenig Lagoon," Jamie says. Those eyes are on Birdie again, and she hopes she isn't going red. "Can you show me where it is?" They're unlocking their bike chains, nearly in sync, and Birdie reaches. I should work on lit." "Listen," says Jamie, facing away to climb onto her bike. "If you'd rather not, that's fine. But I want to see it, and I want to show you something too." Birdie only feels a strange curiosity after the shock. Seated on her own bike, she looks over at Jamie, and the challenge is as palpable as the humidity. Birdie should get home to the aircon, shouldn't take it. 15 minutes later, she's sweating through her sunscreen and breaking. The dismal Bitterman Square is empty, and they chain their bikes up. An extra 6 minutes climbing, banishing thoughts of Jamie watching her back with those intent eyes, and they crest the final limestone monument. Birdie's lungs grapple for the chance at a good intake of air, and her shirt is glued to her skin with sweat. And with this overview, all she can do is collapse down onto the rock. Jamie rushes forward and down to the lagoon. Birdie languishes in procrastination and watches her wade up in the hems of her school shorts, brush her fingers through the water, even taste the tip of her finger after the fact. Birdie has to laugh to herself and prepares witticisms for once she stands. Jamie climbs up, shoots out a grin and announces, "Watch this!" With astounding Olympic-worthy form, Jamie dives into the water. All caution flies out when Birdie sees something opening up along Jamie's skin, and she stands for a better look. 3. Jamie's debut at the best place to swim is cut short. And for a proper reason, not an excuse or any human stupidity she can hold accountable. Languishing indoors is made better by the full blast aircon and Birdie's mother, who comes bearing a lemonade ice block for Jamie and a wet flannel and chiding for Birdie. Despite thanks for helping Birdie back home, Jamie has to swallow down the pangs of guilt for bringing Birdie out in the first place, along with the melt of the ice block. Once Birdie's mother leaves the room, she gives a shaky smile. "Sorry about my mom. She's nice. Well, if she's not bothering you." The sunlight is Midas touched, transmuting to gold, spilling across the dusty spat of Birdie's room. Up from the once white carpet, the only place that's organised is a desk, and barely, no matter the colour coding. The walls are cluttered with unfamiliar posters, and bookshelves strained with a confusion of different times and genres. from Austin to Collins. Ugh, I'm sorry, Bertie says for the 14th time since she fainted. Jamie snaps her attention back to the girl reclined against the bed frame. She's grasping onto a pillow in her lap like a lifebuoy. I was stupid, she continues. I just needed to see. She shoots Jamie through with a look, dark eyes dreamy yet overlaid on a bright wash. Some of the amber gold shines through. There's no room to move away. Yeah, that was the intention, Jamie says. She follows her meaning through the eye of the needle. It may not be obvious since you were distracted, but I'm a mermaid. Bertie laughs, choked and closely followed with an apology. Even if this chance at an anchor were damned, Jamie is entranced. She leans forward and grabs a glass of water on the bedside table, then shoves it towards Bertie. You're dehydrated. 4. Next time Jamie drives. On her piers and shaky on the road, she sacrifices time and petrol for Bertie. The shore side is lovelier to gaze at when you're in the passenger seat. Bertie leans down the window and lets the sea breeze in, salty and perfect in the space between her and Jamie, whose short-cropped hair is waving and whose eyes soften at the corners with the hit of the wind. It's Saturday, and Bertie knows more, as much as she should have the first time. Bertie should be working on a head start for her lit essay, and instead she's staring at the baby blue light, dyeing Jamie's tan skin cool. You didn't have a tail. It's been almost 2 lots of 24 hours, and the thought has been swirling around her mind as if it were going down a drain pipe, crystallizing here. The corner of Jamie's mouth quirks up and she says, Yeah, that's a myth. Oh. Bertie forces herself to look away. 'Cause, like, when I think about a mermaid, that's what comes to mind. She really wants to shut up. Most of what you know is a myth, Jamie says, and Bertie looks back to see that that corner of her mouth is still up. It's cool though. I want water magic. Bertie goes full. Are your parents mermaids too? They drive over a shallow hill, smoothed over by bitumen, but giving her stomach an overdue flip. Jamie says, Nah, it's not a genetic thing. They don't know about my condition though. Now Bertie feels her lips ghost into a smile. Your condition. Her smile falters and the last and most potent, most harshly concentrated question bubbles up on her tongue. She says it before she has the chance to run away again. Why me? Today, no answer will come. 5. Jamie can't get away from Bertie. It's everything. There's this instant, the first time Bertie sleeps over, lit by the glow of the oven. They're making pizza, crafted out of pre-purchased bases and jars of tomato paste and meticulously cut capsicum and German sausage and piles of grated cheddar. The longer Bertie helps, the more she relaxes, the more she shoots teeth-flashing smiles and laughs without choking. It's ice melt, each tightly packed layer being heated up and torn apart, bringing Jamie closest to the shining core. Except Bertie isn't losing parts of herself. She's pulling open the blackout curtains. They eat their homemade pizza on Jamie's plush new couch. Bertie introduces Jamie to Dragon Ball. Suddenly the posters on Bertie's wall make more sense. When Bertie gets up, there's a secure smile on her face, and she takes both of their empty plates on the way. Alone in a room barely recognizable to her, nothing to catch her eye except the screen poorly paused on in-between. Reality seems to drift away. She knows about the wind, the mechanics of high and low pressure systems, sea breezes, which rustles the gum leaves outside like hysteria. She knows about wind-driven waves, which run across the surface of the ocean, that disturbance reaching far. She knows the tides and the moon, aeolian processes and rock formations, the Tamala limestone she loves like a sister. They keep her mind rooted in this world. But her wind and tides and moon don't help when she's inside, sinking onto a couch, wondering how to breathe. Are you okay? Jamie looks up, sees the blue glaze of the television light spilling across Bertie's cheek, and reaches up. She pulls away when her hand lands on Bertie's arm. Bertie grabs it and keeps it, stroking a thumb over it. When Jamie doesn't answer, Bertie doesn't push. She sits centimeters closer than before, and their hands and shoulders touch. And Jamie wonders if she'll ever drift from shore again, with Bertie here. 6. Once the school timetable is set in place, Bertie's life is a cycle. for study, for writing lit essays and studying physics and working on modern history projects. In the past, this would be supplemented by a routine of sitting with her group at lunch, going to birthday parties on the weekends, and messaging them with questions about assessments. Life now is defined by drives down to the supermarket during lunch, drives down to Koenig Lagoon every second day after school and the weekend, and long chains of text messages that make Bertie's head spin. And there's the real, undeniable magic she sees with every drive, bursting into her reality and taking apart all her notions of the world in a disassembly line. In week 6 of term 1, Bertie has had the good sense to pack her swimsuit. She left it in Jamie's car when she picked her up and puts it on under her uniform before leaving. I'm going to lose it, says Jamie on the way. Bertie smirks. Oh yeah? Miss Ross wants me to submit to another geography competition. She bugs me about it every class. Fuck. Bertie laughs. You're so annoying. What's there to complain about? It's not my thing. The lagoon is icy blue and enticing, and this is the first time they'll be swimming together. When she pulls off her shoes and socks, blouse and skirt, to remain in her one-piece swimsuit below, she resists the desire to hide herself in front of Jamie, who always stays in her clothing. When Jamie's got her gills out, Bertie's standing on the crappy plinth, bare soles burning. Watching Jamie stare at her as she glides through the water is too much, though, more than the promise of the water's shock. She plays a familiar trick on herself. If she doesn't jump in 3 seconds, she'll die. It's enough to push her every time. Jamie cheers as she splashes against the surface tension, buried underwater before she climbs and surfaces. Jamie's pastel purple hair, brown roots grown out to her ears, is dark as hypoxia when wet. In week 2 of term 2, Bertie is a stowaway. Her eyes aren't red anymore, and they are watching some old cartoon, wires hanging in the air between them, suspended on fishing wire, ready to be plucked out by either of them. But Jamie just pulls an arm closer around Bertie, closer than possible, and it's enough to combat intolerance single-handedly. Later that evening, Jamie pulls out a dubious home bleach kit, and they apply paste to their hair in her living room, tucking away each segment with aluminum foil. Bertie's dark hair ends up a golden brown, and Jamie's bleach-ruined hair is bright and blonde again, ready to be dyed new. 2.5 weeks later, she smells the chemical odor of bleach as she helps her mum clean the house, and has to lie about why her face is flushed. In week 6 of term 2, they eat utter trash together, and map at the snacks aisle, and run themselves into bruises under their eyes and sleep-hazy minds for an 80% instead of a 78%. At least, that's Bertie's goal. She's figured out that the only time Jamie studies is when Bertie's watching. In week 5 of term 3, Bertie takes Jamie to Koenig Lagoon for the entire day for her birthday. She makes a picnic, chocolate-dipped strawberries and fancy sandwiches, each item having her ask herself, is this too much? Not enough? She brings her swimsuit and they hug in the 12 parts per litre water, and Bertie cries, but hides it in the saline. And it's not about Bertie's need to kiss her. Bertie has never had a most important person before, not like overnight study schedules and sleepovers and a place that belongs to them. Long strings of messages running down her phone. In week 1 of term 4, Bertie takes her place next to Jamie in the first form period of the term, and even as they chatter about their shared holiday, the spirit in Bertie's ribcage doesn't stop aching. The pain spikes with each beat of the heart. Why me? Why me? Why me? 7. On November 26th, Bertie gets in the water first. Evidently, she was tired of waiting up. Jamie watches from above, from the craggy plinth. There's an ache under her jaw. She's studied the 12 parts per litre, the aeolian processes, the tides, the sea breeze. Up here in the Tamala limestone, she feels every sensation as if they belong entirely to her, and realises the depth of these anchors, the weight, the length they've sunk. The closer she knows, the deeper. She doesn't know Bertie all the way yet. There's only one path forward. When Jamie parts the curtain of the water, the skin on her neck, the shorty between her and Bertie, the brackish water that fills her up is an old, true friend who would never let go. The closest between them is instinct, and Bertie doesn't flinch when Jamie comes to wrap an arm around her shoulder, craving the warmth between them within the cool. I can't believe it's over. Bertie breathes. It's evening and the sunset is gone, barely leaving the smear of weak yellow on the edge of the horizon, the sky above turning indigo with the depth of night. She looks up, leaning into Jamie even as she meets the stars fading into life above, and that ache in Jamie's jaw worsens. Bertie's face is increasingly difficult to make out. I know, is all Jamie can say. Bertie glances back over, a grin parting her face that's distinct even in the vagueness of night. We need to make this summer everything. Yeah. It's easier in the dark. The actions themselves aren't easy once you strip them of meaning. From here, from how close they are, all Jamie must do is lean forward, bridge that gap with a simple press of lips. In the dimness, there's a choked off gasp, before time grows sweet and fluid as Bertie kisses back. When she pulls back, it's not with the sentimental gentleness, but with harsh whiplash. It's almost impossible to make out her piercing dark eyes, the borderline between pupil and iris, but Jamie can see the shine of the amber coming through. Why me? Bertie asks, with a weight of 298 days. Jamie wants to say, because of the way the light of the sunset and the TV hit your face so perfectly, because of the way you don't choke up your laughs anymore, because you reach out as if you're not afraid to fall, because of the light behind your eyes. She doesn't even realise that because you ground me isn't in the list until much later. Jamie can't speak of any of it. Weighed down, burdened by the ache in her jaw, the phantom press of a knife in her throat. When Bertie slashes through the lagoon, up and out, away over the Tamala limestone barefoot, Jamie can't even call out in worry. It's humid and dark, and you're breathing too fast. The anchor of the brackish water can never be pulled up. It's the end.
Hi, I'm Kaylee Jesnoewski, and this is my story, Gubba. Gleaming down on me, the sun roasted my skin like a marshmallow on a campfire, and my feet charred in the scorching red dirt around me that enveloped all land as far as the eye could see. The lofty metal clothesline cast many reedy lines over the ground, and the bronze skin of my two siblings who sat in front of me. I watched as 2 drops of sweat travel down my arm. It reminded me of the race I just won against my Babana and Juraman. The neighborhood was strangely quieter today than usual, but it didn't seem to bother us. Regaining our energy, we sat outside smoking small glasses of tepid badu, preparing ourselves for another game. We were to play hide and seek next. Placing our glasses down on the table, we paused to decide who would be it in our first game. As we came to a decision, the fun was put on hold when our younger rushed out of the house and demanded that we come inside immediately. Her usually joyful voice now sounded tense and uneasy. Almost immediately, we stood up and began the gloomy walk to the front door, when thunderous noises came from behind me, and all of the dirt where we had just sat suddenly lifted up from the ground in an immense garagoo of red smoke. From this dust arose a copious number of figures. These figures were hefty, square-shaped containers that, after further observation, seemed to be carrying people. But not just any people. They were Gubba. Forcing us into the bathroom, my younger locked the door behind us. Did she want to play hide and seek too? She could have just asked. Waiting around for a while, my siblings and I became curious of the events occurring beyond the thick wooden door that blocked our view. Placing our heads against the door in an attempt to hear any sort of sound that could give us a clue as to what was going on, we heard our younger scream. There were many continuous bangs and yells, until all of a sudden, there was silence. This silence brought us both hope and worry. We hoped our younger was okay, but what if she wasn't? Attempting to see the brighter side of things, we were ready to leave the bathroom, past the locked door, assuming our younger awaited us on the other side. Just as we hoped, the door's lock began to open. Exhilaration engulfed my body, filling it with warmth like a hot chocolate on a cold day. But I was wrong. A tall figure emerged. His eyes were the gross green of a swamp, and his hair was brown like tree bark. But there was one feature about him that throughout my life I had learnt to dislike. He was Gubba. Followed by many other male, who looked almost identical to him, he leant down in front of us and reached for my arm. Lifting me into the air,
he carried me out of the bathroom. Whilst trying to break free, I saw each of my siblings being carried away too, screaming and punching in their attempt to break free. Leaving the house, I was horrified. Pinned down on the porch by 3 more Gubbas was my Wayanga. I wanted to break free of this male's grasp. I needed to help my Duran gang, but this Thogala was too strong. Wrapping one hand around my legs, the other around my arms and torso, he had complete control over me. He carried me to one of the strange vehicles. It was short and box-like with a shiny coating. The top was covered in windows, and underneath were 4 round dish-like objects that seemed to hold it above the ground. Ramming me into the room on wheels, he locked me in, and it started to move. The house slowly left my view. So did my mujin. Arriving at an outlandish house, nothing like the one I was accustomed to, the Thogalas yelled a strange gibberish that I couldn't understand. Pulling my hand, they dragged me inside, where a petite plump Dian stood at the door waiting. Feeling trapped, all I wished for was to go home, to return to my Wayanga. But this was expected to be my home now, with the Gubba, never to see my mujin again. Thank you. Hope you liked it.